Welcome back. You're watching AM. It is great to have your company this morning. Just gone 6:21. China is about a third of our trade. It's a very important relationship for us. In fact, about 40% of our meat goes up to China. And at the moment, China is in a bit of strife because there are huge protests across the country, which is very rare for China, under the leadership of Xi Jinping against their COVID zero policy. So should we be worried about it here? I want to ask Chris Luxon, who's the National Party leader this morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Ryan. Good to be with you.
Yeah, good to have you. First of all, congratulations. Today is exactly 1 year, isn't it, since you took office?
It is actually a year since I've become the leader of the National Party.
How do you feel?
I feel great. I mean, it's been quite a year. We've made, I think, tremendous progress in that time. There's always more to do, and I'm always constructively dissatisfied, so it's going to be quite a fun year ahead.
What would you give yourself a rating out of 10 for your first year?
Oh, there's always things I could do better. I think probably the low point of the year was my 4-day holiday to Te Puke, really. I
don't think anyone's going to argue with that.
Yeah.
But seriously, you're into targets.
Or declaring to you that I like country music was probably another low point.
Yeah,
you know,
but you like targets, don't you? And you like things. So what would you score yourself if you had to give a score out of 10?
Look, I mean, I always I probably give myself a 7.
Okay, all right, there we go. Room for improvement.
Yeah, always room for improvement.
Let's talk about China. How worried should we be about what's happening in China? And do you stand with the protesters, or do you stand with the government who's trying to stamp out COVID?
Well, look, I mean, we, as part of being a modern liberal democracy, our values are really important to us. We have an independent foreign policy where we act in our own interests and with our own values. We believe in multilateralism because that's actually partnering with others that have the same values, and we believe in the rules-based law. But what we really believe in is democracy, and we believe that people should be free to express themselves through protest. You've seen that happen here in New Zealand over the last week, and we would support people being able to do that all around the world.
Including the protests at Parliament? I mean, because there are similarities, aren't there? Obviously, to a lesser extent, with what's happening in China versus what happened in New Zealand, but the principle is the same. There are curtailing of freedoms, and there is a real pushback from people.
Yeah, so you saw that this week with respect to, Janak Patel's passing. You saw protesters protesting peacefully, strongly, raising their concerns. That's something that we always support in a democracy. So with respect to China, we want to be able to, the government will continue to monitor the situation, I imagine, very closely. And, whether it's been a Labour government or a national government, there's actually very strong alignment and bipartisanship in terms of how we present New Zealand. And we want to make sure we're consistent in our language, that we have no surprises, and we raise those concerns with our partners.
The pension, the age of the pension entitlement. So we're going to go under your leadership. We would phase in from 65 to 67. And we've had people contacting us this morning saying, all very well for you sitting in a suit in an office, not so much for somebody who's doing the hard graft and working and their body gives up. What do you say to them? Well,
look, we've got to face facts, which is we've got an ageing population. Every decade we live another 1.3 years in terms of life expectancy. And we've also got a rising level of cost as a consequence. And all we're saying is, look, let's do this in a really slow, gradual way. Give people 15 to 20 years notice that it's coming. And then even then, let's stage it out so that 2 years is digested.
But your body can only work manual labour for so long. Well, so then, what do you say to your builders this morning?
Well, then let's look at some other things if that's necessary in terms of supports that we might need to have for people.
Like what?
But what I'd say to you is, I worked in organisations where I had workers that had been with the company, say, for 50 years, 40 years, and you can change the types of roles that you can do. A lot of builders that I talk to, frankly, when they're in their 30s, their bodies are going through some pretty tough times, and they often then change the type of role they do. They might be less on the tools and more into the project management side of things or other things as well. So I get it. It's really tough in the sense of, but you have to rule a line somewhere. But many other countries are already at 67.
But you would look at some sort of support for people. If they were in a manual job and they had no other options available to them, they hadn't upskilled to be able to do something else, you're saying there might be support.
Well, where we've got, whether it's disability payments or those sorts of things. But what I'm saying is, on the superannuation thing, you have to draw a line somewhere. The pragmatic, practical thing is to give people plenty of time to adjust.
What about Maori? So if you're a Maori male, 73 is your life expectancy, an Asian male, 85.
Yeah.
How's that fair?
So Maori, live 7 years shorter than the rest of the population. That's a major challenge for New Zealand. What we really have to then work on is Maori health outcomes and make sure that we can make great progress on that. I just think mixing our superannuation system, where we have to have a retirement age across the country, you don't fiddle with that. What you need to do is then make really great progress on Maori health outcomes.
So you would never do it.
That is something that I'm really concerned concerned about, to be honest, because, in our government, in this government, over the last 5 years, there's been no improvement in health outcomes for all New Zealanders. And when you look at the next 5 years, even under the Maori Health Authority, they're saying there won't be a single improved health outcome for Maori for another 5 years. That's a decade where we actually haven't had any improved health outcomes. So that's a different situation where we should be really determined in the health portfolios to make progress on improving outcomes for everybody
What's your target for Maori life expectancy, Pacifica life expectancy in New Zealand under a national government? You've been heavily critical of what Labour has and hasn't done. What's your target?
Well, our target has to be able to close the gap and to be able to have Maori health outcomes the same
by
as the
how much,
population.
by when?
Well, as fast as we possibly can. I can't give you a number today, but what I can say is I am ruthlessly obsessed on outcomes. I care less about how they're delivered, but I actually want them delivered very, very strongly.
All right. Let's talk about the tax for a second, because we had Cameron Baggery on the program yesterday, and he said obviously the Reserve Bank is predicting we'll go into a recession, talking very loudly about that. And one of the implications for that for the government, of course, is the fact that there'll be a lower tax take. There'll be a potential hole in the budget. You either have to cut services or you have to increase taxes. For your predictions for what Labour will do next year, what do you reckon?
Well, I don't know what they would do, but what I just say to you is we do have a narrow forecast for inflation being here for longer, interest rates having to go up for higher, we've got a potential recession coming, and we've got rising levels of unemployment. That's the forecast that's been painted, just last week. I think we should actually say, look, we don't have to accept that. We don't actually have to accept that a recession can come. The problem that we've got is that the government is spending $1 billion more incrementally each and every week, and so they've got the foot flat on the accelerator. The economy is constrained because immigration has been constrained, and the Reserve Bank has gone from printing money, foot on the accelerator, to now putting it heavily on the brakes with rising interest rates. And so what you really want is the government and the Reserve Bank working together in concert to tackle inflation and to be able to get it down. And so government needs to show some fiscal restraint and some disciplined spending. Our view is that there is a tremendous amount of waste going on in the system.
I know, but we've talked about
No, but let me give you a really good example.
I know, but you only ever give one or two examples. You never actually add them up to something that's significant enough to make an impact on the thing you're talking about.
But I can tell you, Ryan, people make adjustments in their own households as they go through these tough economic times. As a former CEO, when I got a shock, I made an adjustment to the plan. It's necessary.
So where would your adjustment be?
Well, here's the thing. I wouldn't be doing a Radio New Zealand TVNZ merger.
Okay, there's 300 million.
No, but it's not. It's $211 million every year for the next 30 years. It's $6 billion because the government's going to underwrite and subsidise our public broadcasting because the commercial model at TVNZ
but again,
is destroyed.
drop in the ocean.
No, $6 billion over 30 years is money that we could, $211 million
I know
a
it's
year
money,
could be used a lot.
but in terms of what you're trying to address, which is inflation, it's a drop in the ocean.
$3 billion on three waters. $2 billion when you think about 14,000 more bureaucrats added into Wellington. $1 billion being spent on communications and management consultancy.
Okay, let's take all those things you've just said. How much will that reduce inflation by?
Well, what that's got to do is be able to then...
No, hang on. How much will it reduce inflation?
Well, our inflation, half of our inflation is driven by domestic stuff, right, which is the government spending.
So half of our inflation would disappear?
Half of our inflation we could get more under control by actually having more discipline.
We could get rid of half of our inflation if the government cut the things you've just mentioned?
No, let me back you up. So what I'm saying to you is half of our inflation, yes, can come from international factors, and New Zealand needs to be incredibly well managed because when the global economy goes south, we get smacked around a lot more than medium-sized or large-sized countries. But half of it, as you've seen from Adrian Orr, says, hey, listen, government, you've actually got to rein in your spending in the same way he's saying households have to rein in their spending. That's what we're saying is, and I just know that when you've taken away all the targets from public service spending, we're actually not getting, we've got a culture of waste sitting there.
Can we talk about, speaking of waste, some people might think it's a bit of a waste, this office. I'm going to show you a photo of the your Botany Electorate office, which we are, as taxpayers, we are paying. You own this building, right? And then we're paying you to rent it off you. Is that how it works? So 45 grand?
So what happens here is it's quite, it's been historically quite common that MPs might own their own electorate office. In my case here, I became the MP for Botany, or before I just became the MP of Botany. We wanted to have a really good base and a great place for the community to come through. We got a great place and a great location. We cleared it all with parliamentary services. They think we're getting good value for the taxpayer with a below market rent. And it was all cleared and approved by them. So, what's been important important is we didn't want to have a situation whereby a different landlord meant that we had no certainty over a long run. I plan to be the MP for Botany for some time. It's been Grand Central Station. It's in a great location, and we've got a great base for our staff and also for our for constituents to come in and out.
Do you reckon you'll sell it when you finish?
I don't know. I haven't thought about that far. I don't plan to finish in a short time.
All right, thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Appreciate
As always, Chris Luxon, the National Party leader who has been in the job now for a year. It has just gone 28 away from 7.